Hello, everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As always, I do like to remind you, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. Alright, so finally it is time to do the episode on the book review that nobody asked for. Not that you guys have asked for any of my book reviews, but this one actually probably got the most response once I told people on Twitter that I was even considering reading this book. And that is, as I'm sure you've already figured out from the title, The Chapo Guide to Revolution, a manifesto against logic, facts, and reason by the gentleman. I make that point, I'll come back to it. The gentleman of Chapo Trap House. Now, when I first posted up on Twitter and I posted on Instagram that I had the book, I got responses ranging anywhere from ew to oh my dear God no to why are you torturing yourself by reading this? And so I figured that's always a good place to start my book reviews, is telling you guys why I bothered to read this book. And first and foremost, once I finally got around to pulling the trigger on buying the book, this had actually been in like my Amazon recommended listing doojibber ever since it was a pre-order, and I was like, fuck off, Amazon, I do not want to buy this book. Why are you recommending me this book? Just because I read other political books, get this out of my recommended feed. But then reviews started coming out on the book. I remember I read the Politico one, and there's been a couple other that I've read since I started reading the book and since I've finished it up. And so I was just finally like, you know what? I'm curious. Why not? Let's give it a whirl. Let's see if it's as bad as I'm thinking it's going to be and everybody else is assuming it's going to be. And then the second reason was, when I was thinking about reading this book and doing this review, I was thinking a lot about how, especially on the right now, you have a lot of grifter types. You know, the Candace Kirks, the Candace Owens, people like that. And now, especially like the new grift on the right is the people that are leaving the Republican Party because of Trump. People like fucking Max Boot and Rick Wilson and Tom Nichols. And that's kind of becoming like the new grift on the right. And I was like, okay, is there anything analogous to that on the left? Like, are there any kind of like lefty grifters? And when I say grifters in this sense, I mean this in like the very like online Twitter sense of how we use that word, where it's like you have people who are kind of jumping onto a train because you see that one person is becoming very popular and potentially making money off of spouting certain things or acting in a certain way, so you want to jump up and do the same thing. So you try to be like this obnoxious person on the internet and in person in order to get likes and retweets, and hopefully maybe somebody will give you some money for being this way. So I was kind of wondering if there was anything like that on the left, and these were the first guys I kind of landed on, and I'll come back to that idea once I kind of do the summary on this, because I went into this with one idea and I've shifted my idea on it. So anyway, getting into the book itself, it is structured into 6 different chapters. You've got a chapter called World, Libs, Cons, Media, Culture, and Work. And so obviously you kind of get the gist off of each chapter's title of what that chapter is going to be about. And before we get too far into this review, something I do want to say off the rip, because normally this would be something that I would include like in the conclusion part of me describing a book, but I want to go ahead and say it from the beginning. And that is, especially in reference to other reviews that I have seen on this book, when I was reading it, and especially like in the introductory chapter, in kind of like the introduction, they come right up to the line of saying this, but they don't outright say it. But it was relatively obvious to me when I was reading this book that this is not meant to be a 1000% serious, very just like non-fiction serious thing that you read in a very serious fashion. In fact, it's meant to be satirical. Like, this is satire. And I don't say that in saying that they don't believe what they write, but it's being done in such a way as to satirize people. And I'm like, wait a minute, am I the only person that gets this joke outside of the Chapo crowd? I was very confused at people taking this book as like literal face value, and I'm just like, it's meant to be funny. But then I started thinking about it a little more, and I'm like, well, first of all, you can't really tell somebody what is and is not funny, because that's subjective to every person. It's kind of like arguing about feelings. Like, you can't really argue. If somebody says, I feel this way, it's like, okay, cool. Like, there's really no argument there. But I think what it is with this and with the podcast, there's a certain aesthetic that if you don't understand, kind of like, they call themselves dirtbag socialist. I call myself and my people trash libertarians. And there's a certain aesthetic and understanding that goes along with kind of calling yourself something like that. So maybe if you are not of that mindset and you don't really, you don't get it, I guess is really the only way I can describe it, then you might not understand the humor in this book. But if you are somebody who can kind of take a step back and maybe not take yourself quite so seriously and take your tribe quite so seriously, and especially being a libertarian, like I think a lot of you would like this book a lot more than you would think you would. But it's funny to me to watch people take it so seriously and get so offended and uptight about it. And it's like, it's humor. It's satire. It's not like you're taking this the wrong way. And I'm like, I don't get people who don't get the joke of this book and the Chapo Trap House podcast. So yeah, I wanted to go ahead and say that off the rip, and so that you can understand when I was reading this, what, like, the position I was coming from. So let's go ahead and start getting into the book itself. So the real first proper chapter in this book is the World Chapter. And obviously what it is about is the world and America's role in it, starting from like the end of World War II and moving forward to present day. Now, I'm not going to go into like super detail of what's in each one of these chapters, because obviously you can read the book if you want to. But overall, whoever wrote this chapter is not ignorant of world history and the US's place in it. And it's incredibly funny to read this chapter. Like, this is, if it wasn't for the actually very little in this chapter invokement of anti-capitalism, you would think that this chapter was written by a very strident anti-war libertarian. Not saying like trying to subtweet anybody on this, but I'm just saying a general anti-war libertarian could read this chapter and be like, yes, this is correct, because they basically make the argument, which I'm sure nobody here is going to argue with, is that ever since World War II, pretty much every U.S. involvement in foreign countries has been bullshit and has backfired and has left us not much of anything except for a huge military debt and a pile of dead bodies. And yeah, there's a lot to agree with in this chapter. And it's funny. Like, they do throughout the chapter, there's these little blurbs on different countries, and the descriptions of the countries are just laugh out loud funny. Like, especially the Iran one. That's just like, oh my God. But yeah, like, whoever wrote this chapter, like, I can be friends with this person. Like, I could go out drinking with this person and we can have a great time talking about bad, stupid, dumb U.S. interventions in foreign countries. So, moving on to the next chapter, and that is the Libs Chapter. Oh my God. Holy shit. Nobody is spared the wood chipper. Like, these dudes, everybody gets the wood chipper. And there is something to be said for that. Like, they're not playing for Team Lib. Like, there's savage liberals, I would say probably more than conservatives, because and in their view, Democrats sold out the liberal cause. And I can kind of see their point, especially the way they lay it out. But it's just like, it's so hilarious to watch them talk about it. And it's just like, golly, just savage everybody, even Obama. Like, Obama probably gets it worse than anybody. And it's like, wow, just damn. But again, whoever wrote this chapter, like, I could probably be friends with this person too. Just because, if for nothing else, this person wrote the line that Obama presided over a surveillance state was so tentacular that it's so high-key thick that it would make Ceausescu come. And I'm like, anybody who writes that, I can probably hang out with you. So that's it's a savagely funny chapter. Like, there are parts of this book that are just straight up laugh out loud funny. Like, no matter what you may happen to think about these guys, they are funny. And this chapter kind of ends with a little brief intermission into neoliberalism and what the word neoliberal means now, which basically is, as I'm pretty sure anybody here would agree with, means fuck all at this point, because everybody tries to claim neoliberalism, even people who have no business claiming neoliberalism. Jennifer Rubin, I'm looking at you. But yeah, just a little brief history of neoliberalism and how it basically means nothing anymore, which is a fun, interesting little read. And before I move on from this chapter onto the cons chapter, I do want to point out at the end of both of those chapters, they have a section kind of breaking down the general stereotypes of each side, your stereotypical libs and your stereotypical cons, which those are hilarious too. Like, oh my god, I think my favorite one for the libs would be the celebrity douchebag one. But possibly Wine Mom. But those would be neck and neck for me. But it's all hysterical, and again, it's all satirical, but they're not wrong either. So, moving on to the cons chapter. Now, obviously, everybody here gets the wood chipper too, because you are dealing with people who identify with socialists, so obviously they do not like anybody in the conservative movement. But this is where things kind of got interesting, because this is obviously where you would start talking about libertarians. And actually, it's not as bad as I was expecting. There's a section on Ayn Rand, which, I mean, I've seen other libertarians going harder on Rand than they went in on Rand. And then there's another section where they lump together Murray Rothbard and Hoppe, which are two things that kind of don't go together, but whatever. I mean, Murray gets like maybe a paragraph, and then the rest of the section is on Hoppe. And as far as I'm concerned, you can go in on Hoppe all day. I don't care. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I've got plenty of things to say, especially about his later works, like his early stuff. Okay, cool. But this new shit he's coming out with, nah, it's a no from me, dog. But they actually do rightly point out, though, in the book, moving on from the libertarian stuff, because that's it. That's pretty much it in the whole book. I expected them to go in harder on us than probably anybody else, because I ascribe to the cultural, well, not the cultural, but the political horseshoe theory, and that's to say that the people on both ends of the horseshoe are not only further away from the top of the horseshoe, they are much closer to each other than they are to anybody else. And if I had to make a horseshoe of this, I would put libertarians on one side and socialists on the other. And because we tend to be closer to each other on the horseshoe, at least this particular horseshoe, we tend to go in on each other a lot. And I was expecting a lot more out of this book of making fun of libertarians. So, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. But they do rightly point out with Trump that Trump is not this odd aberration that the I'm leaving the party because of Trump people seem to think he is. It's like, no. Trump isn't patient zero. He's the fucking end game of the past 40 years of the Republican Party. Like, come on now. Like, this is not, he didn't hijack your party. Trump is what you guys were always going to produce, just based on the road that you've gone down since you probably go all the way back to Reagan. Like, everything that the Republican Party has stood for since then has led to Trump. So no, he's not some odd, like, oh my God, what has happened here? Like, exactly what the fuck you should have thought was going to happened here. And just a little side rant, because this has nothing to do with the book, but since we're here, this is why I have such a problem with the whole I'm leaving the party because of Trump grift. Like, come on. Like, really? Really? Okay, yeah, Trump's what did it. Okay, not everything leading up to him, like Trump. All right, I see you guys. I see you. I see you with your books and your television deals and trying to be on TV, and I see your tweets. I see all that shit. I see you. I see what you're doing. And you're not taking responsibility for everything that you did to help lead up to this orange Cheeto that lives in the White House right now. All right. Back on topic of the book. Moving on to the next chapter, which is media. And obviously, this is skewering everybody in media, on print, television, everything like that. It is hilarious. And my favorite part about this chapter is, again, they mean it to be satirical, but they are kind of dead spot on, which is how you get a job in journalism now, which is not to go to journalism school and get a degree and then go work for a place and work your way up. No, you just get on Twitter and just tweet edgy shit until somebody notices you and gives you a job. Like, that's how you get a job in journalism now. It's not putting in hard work. It's just being woke on social media is how you get a job. And hey, if you're woke enough and if you tweet enough tweets about fuck white people, maybe you too can get a spot on the New York Times editorial board before you turn 30. Fuck. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, let's move on. Let's move on to the next chapter, which is culture. Now, this chapter was kind of the weird, quirky chapter in this book that took me a second to warm up to, but once I did, I think this might actually be my favorite chapter in the book. And it's written as looking through politics and culture through the lens of discussing various movies and television shows that have come out over the past 30 years or so. And whoever wrote this chapter, I'm not familiar enough. I've not sat down and listened to enough podcasts to really be able to pick out individual voices to figure out who wrote what chapter. Whoever wrote this chapter has a very dark, very absurdist sense of humor, and it took me a second to kind of get into the groove of it, but once I did, I was like, okay, hey, this is actually good. This is pretty fucking funny. And one thing I do want to discuss, and as an actual critique of this, and that is kind of displaying the bias that a lot of socialists and communists have, that you can change culture through politics, and you can't. Politics is downstream from culture. I've told you guys this before. That's what I genuinely believe. So it is interesting to see this chapter kind of discussed from a socialist perspective. But it's just, like I said, it's just this very dark, absurdist humor. And I don't know how many other people are going to like it. I can see a lot of people reading this chapter and being like, what the fuck did I just read? But the best part of this chapter is whoever wrote this has a huge problem with Aaron Sorkin. And to be honest, I've tried to watch The West Wing, and I've never really gotten into it. But I will argue with anybody. The Newsroom was a great show, and if you don't think so, I will argue with you. Yes, it was great, and it ended too soon, and I'm still kind of mad about it. But yeah, there's just this whole Sorkin rant that it's really funny. I would like to see a whole book written by whoever wrote this chapter. I think I would be into it. But moving on to the work chapter. Now, this is probably going to be the most controversial part of this review, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. But I want to make 2 points about this chapter, and I want to go ahead and say off the rip, they are mutually exclusive. Point A and point B are not meant to have anything to do with each other, so please do not conflate the two. Do not try to come at me about this. Okay. First off, this chapter was just not... It lacked something that the other chapters had. Like, every other chapter, even at its just meanest and sharpest, there's still, like... It's still funny. Like, not... I'm trying to struggle to explain this, because explaining, like, humor and why you think something's funny is a very hard thing to do. But all of the other chapters, there was just, like, you know how you can be, like, mean funny? And then sometimes you just, like, you cross a borderline from, like, mean to bitter, and then it's not, like, super funny anymore. Then it's just kind of like, This chapter kind of crossed that line for me. Like, I feel like it could have been done better, I guess. That's the only word I can really think of. Like, it doesn't have, like, it's missing something, this chapter, for me. And the other part of this chapter that I'm very interested in. You know how sometimes when you read something, and, like, even if you don't know the gender of the person that wrote it, you can still tell the gender of the person that wrote it. Like, writing is something of it, like a gendered thing. Like, you know when you're reading something that's written by a man versus something written by a woman. I swear, there are parts of this chapter, in fact, I would say the bulk of this chapter feels like it was written by a woman. Now, I made the points I made before because I'm not trying to say that women can't be funny. Obviously. But I bring that up because in the podcast, they do have... There is a female on the podcast. There is no female credited in this book. Like, all of the men have writing credits. She is not... There's no writing credits. She's not in the back. There's a picture. She's not in the picture. But I swear to God, it feels like a woman wrote this chapter. Like, there's just certain things that are said and certain examples that are used that I cannot see a man having chosen those words in those particular examples. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the work chapter. Now, obviously, this is still satirical in nature, so don't get all hopped up over the 3-hour, 3-day work week and all of that shit. Like, okay, this isn't like an actual plan, people. Like, this isn't something that you can read and then, like, go start instituting it. Like, that's not the point of this book. If you think that's the point, you're kind of missing the point. But, alright, moving on. Alright, so, moving on to the epilogue, which I want to go ahead and say off the rip, I feel like whoever wrote the epilogue also wrote the work chapter, because it has that same tone and that same flow. And actually, now that I think about it, I think the word I was looking for is serious. And the epilogue is written in a very serious way. Like, it's not meant to be satirical or anything. It's meant to be like an actual, like, genuine explanation of their worldview. And the argument is made that basically capitalism will kill itself and socialism will rise from the ashes, which when I was originally reading this, like, I was like, okay, if you're going to use Schumpeter's argument, can you at least credit him? But then I was like, wait a minute, they might not know who Schumpeter is. Wait a minute, some of the people listening to this podcast might not know who Schumpeter is. So, okay, I will back up and not be a libertarian nerd wonk person for a minute. But just as a TLDR of what Schumpeter's argument was in Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, because it's not a short book, but basically it's the idea of creative destruction, and the idea that at some point in the future, now he was writing this back in the 40s, that at some point capitalism would collapse in on itself and socialism would be the thing that would rise out of the ashes. Now, to be sure, he wasn't saying this as like it was a good thing. It was just his prediction. It's not like he was happy about it. But yeah, so that it's an argument that has been made before and made in so many words. And like I said, Schumpeter made this argument back in the 40s, and we still here, bitches. Capitalism is still here, so I don't know. A lot of the things that he touches on in the book kind of do feel very prescient, and definitely do feel like a lot of the current environment. Like, this book doesn't feel like it was written that long ago, Schumpeter's book. But anyway, this is not a review of that book. I will do a review of that book another day. But basically, the idea that socialism is the inevitable endgame of capitalism. And no thanks. Hard pass, obviously. Libertarian. But the thing that I don't understand about socialists and those who espouse socialism and or straight up communism now is this weird, like, not ignorance, because I don't think they're ignorant of the past 100 years, but just this refusal to acknowledge the fact that every time socialism's been tried, it's failed, and not just like a little bit. I mean, like, horribly, like, hundreds of millions of people dead, like, people starving to death, just complete economic collapse, because it's, at its base, it's just impossible to do. And I don't want this to become like a whole critique of socialism, because again, this is a book review about a specific book, not my thoughts on socialism. But yeah, no, I mean, it's been tried. It's failed every time it's been tried, so no thanks. Hard pass. But now to kind of bring it up to, now we've reached the end of the book. So here are kind of my final thoughts on everything. First off, the first thing I want to note is this book is a collaborative book. It's not written by one person. And I feel like when you're going through the chapters, you can definitely tell that different people wrote different chapters, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something that is noticeable. And it kind of, at first I didn't know how I felt about it, but then by the time I got to the end of the book, I was like, okay, this kind of, I don't hate it. Like, I like that kind of writing, because now it's like everybody gets to kind of add their own flavor and their own particular voice, because there's no way that you can kind of smooth out. I think it ended up being, I think it's 4 or 5 different writers on the book. So, I mean, there's really no way to smooth that out to make it all sound like it's one person, and they didn't really try, and that's cool. I'm actually okay with that. Now, to kind of move back to the original question that I had as far as grifters on the left, these guys are not them. Like, they started this podcast back in 2016. They just released this book. I don't even think it's been out 6 months yet. So it's not like they've been around for forever and ever and ever. But as far as I know, they were the first ones to really kind of be in this particular vein of podcasting, of this very, like, dirtbag socialist podcasting, which, I mean, I dig it. Like, I dig the aesthetic. I get it. Like, I understand where they're going with that. And I understand where they're going with, like, the fail son thing. But there has been, since they became successful, and obviously they have become successful, there has been a rash of other podcasts to come along to kind of try to do the same thing that they do. And those are the grifters. So I think just like any other thing, like, you have one person that does something, or one group of people that does something, and they get popular, and then all of a sudden you've got a bunch of copycats. And that's where the grift is starting to come in. So I think you're going to start seeing more and more of that, especially on, like, the socialist left, of people like even, like, I like, we're just talking about podcasts right now, but you can even see it in politics. Like, obviously, like, Ocasio-Cortez got elected, and then all of a sudden there's, like, 50 people running on a democratic socialist platform. Like, what? Like, y'all were not democratic socialists like 15 minutes ago. Like, where the fuck did y'all come from? But again, I guess it's an inevitable thing, I suppose, but it is something that's always worth pointing out, that, like, whether you're doing something because it's genuinely, like, you're doing it for the love of the game, or because you're doing it because, oh, look, somebody else got famous and is making money off doing this thing, so I'm going to do the thing too. Yeah, I think there's going to be more of that. And yeah, I mean, just always something to note. Grifters on the left will appear just as grifters on the right have. But since we are on the topic of people making money off of this, I wanted to go ahead and pull up the exact numbers of the Chapo Trap House Patreon. As of right now, as of this recording, they have 24,457 Patreons, pulling down $109,172 a month. Which, obviously, you have to split that between, I don't know how many people regularly contribute to the podcast, but I mean, there's them. I don't know if they have like sound people, stuff like that. But that's still a pretty damn good living for sitting around and complaining about capitalism on the internet. Like, goddamn, I wish somebody would pay me $109,000 a month to do this podcast. I would do it every damn day. You'd be sick of me. You'd be so damn tired of hearing my voice if somebody paid me $109,000 a month to do this. But it's this weird dichotomy that's going to start coming up more and more as people become successful for doing this. And for myself, I mean, fuck it. I'm a ruthless capitalist. Get your money. Like, get your money. I am not mad at anybody who figures out a way to leverage podcasting into a somewhat lucrative, like, career where you can pay your bills and have extra money. Like, I ain't mad at you at all. But it does set up this, like, weird little thing where it's like, okay, capitalism bad, but people give me lots of money a month, and I speak to sold out rooms on speaking tours, and now I have this book that is selling. So it's kind of like the system didn't really fail you. Like, you figured out how to game the system. You figured out how it works, and now you're pretty damn successful at it. So it's one of those things, though. And it's like, I understand, like, once you put it out there that you hold certain ideals, and even to that point in the book, they do point out that obviously this is how they felt when they started the podcast. It's how they still feel now. It's how they'll continue to feel no matter how much money they make. But at some point, you gotta have to address the cognitive dissonance of being anti-capitalist and making a shit ton of money from sitting around and talking into a microphone and giving your opinions about things like this. Where else but capitalism can you make this happen? Like, there's just no other economic system where you can get people to give you money for your opinions. Like, it's peak capitalism. Patreon is peak capitalism. Like, and they only have like one tier on their Patreon page. It's nuts. There's one $5 tier, and that's it. Like, they found enough people to give them that much money a month. Just $5 donations. Like, everybody else has tiers and different things and all this stuff. And I look at it and I'm just like, I don't know if I will ever do that. I mean, I never say never, but that's whole next level to me. So, I mean, I think if I ever did it, I might do it something like the Chapo people do. But anyway, that's not the point of this podcast. That's a whole nother conversation. But it's just like, you know, at some point you have to address it. And there's also this idea of audience capture. And I know I've discussed it before. I know I discussed it when I did my Jordan Peterson episode. But, like, you're kind of, like, locked in now. Like, it's not exactly like they can change their message and all of a sudden become, like, free market, laissez-faire libertarians that are like, hell yeah, capitalism is the best thing ever, because that's not how you got your come up. So now you're kind of stuck. So, whatever, that's their problem, not mine. But it's funny. It's funny to think about. So, moving on to other things that I wanted to talk about before we bounce out of this. I read this book, and honestly, like, going into it, I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. Like, before I started reading the book, I never listened to an episode of Chapo Trap House. Like, I didn't really know anything other than they were socialist. So, I kind of went into the book as a blank slate, and I found the book humorous. Like, it's funny. Like, there are parts that are laugh out loud funny. And so I decided, I'm like, whatever, let me listen to a couple podcasts, see what that flavor is like. And again, there are some parts that are fucking laugh out loud funny. Like, they had one of the most recent episodes, I forget what the title of the episode was, but they were talking about police and the kind of how fucked up police are and how punitive our criminal justice system is. And there were points in that episode where I was just like dying laughing. Like, I was trying to listen to it at work. I had to stop because people were staring at me like, what the hell is wrong with this girl? Why is she laughing? It's just like, you know, you can you can disagree with people on some things and still be able to find some spots where there are common ground. And the flavor that I kind of got, especially from listening to some of the podcasts, there's some anarcho going on there. Like some of the things that are said and some of the things that are pointed out, like there's a definite anarcho streak in there. Obviously not ANCAP, maybe ANCOM if you wanted to put a label on it. But the thing that kind of killed me the most is like listening to them talk. Like they've identified the problems. Like you see where the problems are. Like you see that the state is a problem. Like you see that the police are a problem. You see that our criminal justice system is a problem. You see that crony capitalism is a problem. But you're blaming the wrong institution. Like you're blaming capitalism for things that you should be blaming the state for. And instead of being mad at capitalism, you should be mad at the state. It's like you're right there. Like you see the problems, but we just gotta you gotta see where you're not going far enough. Like you're stopping at capitalism, but you're not going that last step and seeing that it's not the economic system that's the problem. It's the state that's the problem. The state is the one that keeps fucking you over. And it's the state interfering in capitalism that keeps fucking you over. And it's like, people like that, like if you can just get them past that last step and get them to see, like, just go ahead and see the whole forest. Those might be the people that you can reach. Like, not saying that you could possibly turn these guys from socialists to libertarians, but, like, maybe you can. Like, there's hope. Like, if you can just get past that last hurdle and see who the real problem is, maybe. Okay, one last thing I want to discuss before I wrap this up, because this has already gone way, way longer than I planned. But I don't suppose I can do this episode, and I don't suppose I can discuss the Chapo folks without discussing the Robbie Suave thing, which Dave Smith brought up a couple weeks ago on one of his episodes. And that's this little rant that they went on. And I don't know when the Chapo piece is from. I think I remember seeing Robbie tweet about it, though, and he didn't really seem to give a shit. So I was just like, oh, whatever, I don't care. If he doesn't care, I don't care. But anyway, I guess at some point in the past, Robbie was actually a guest on Chapo. And so they were talking about this piece that Robbie had written for Reason. And it's about how basically the gist of the piece is basically that the DSA crowd, like, okay, like, it's cool, you're having your moment, but come talk to us libertarians when this all comes crashing down around your head. Because as most of you know, especially if you are old enough or have been in this game long enough to remember 2008 and to remember the Tea Party surge and to remember how everything started out and everything was just so bright and shiny and wonderful. And here we are 10 years later, just surveying the wreckage and are like, what the fuck happened to our movement? This was going to be it. This was going to be the thing that changed America. And now it's like, shit, fuck, what happened? We were so close. But he wrote an article basically making those same points that, like, okay, yeah, we had our moment in the sun too, and we had our media fluffery, and we had our little rallies and everything, and people covered us, and people gave a shit about us, and then they stopped, and then everything kind of just went to hell. But somebody, like I don't listen to it enough to know, like, who's who. Somebody decided to, like, get in their feels about this piece. I mean, I don't understand being mad about this piece. But anyway. So basically, they kind of went on this whole rant about Robbie and about him being a Beltway libertarian douchebag and all this stuff and, like, whatever. Like, okay, first of all, like, okay, don't anybody who's listening to this podcast, I know some of y'all out there, don't pretend like you don't make fun of Beltway libertarians, because I know some of y'all do. I don't. They're my people too. But yeah, let's not get on some kind of high horse here, like no libertarians ever ripped on Beltway libertarians. Second of all, like, okay, so I mean, I look at that whole rant like, okay, dude, you just in your feels, like, whatever. I'm not getting twisted over that, like, who, whatever, okay, fine. But it is kind of bad form to talk shit about a former guest. Like, that's rude. Don't do that. Like, don't be that tacky ass person. But it was just, the whole thing was just kind of like weird to me. And honestly, for any of the DSA types who might actually stumble onto this and actually make it this far into the podcast, no, seriously, come listen to the libertarians. We've played this game. We've lived this life. We know how this ends, and once everything crashes and burns for you too, and you are also staring at the wreckage of your movement and wondering what the fuck happened and where do you go from here, come talk to the libertarians. We'll tell you how to go forward from here. So that's where I want to leave off on this. Like I said, I actually liked the book a lot more than I thought I would. And I think a lot of you would too, honestly, if you want to read it. And there is value in reading things that you don't think that you're going to have anything to agree with, and you know off the rip that you're going to kind of disagree with the premise of it. But I think it is worthwhile to leave your bubble every now and again and expose yourself to things that you know you're not going to agree with, just so that you can kind of see how the other half lives and the other half thinks. Because how are you ever going to, at best, have a debate with somebody and at worst refute what they have to say if you don't really know what it is they're saying? So yeah, I encourage everybody to, even if it's not this book, but anything, go read Jacobin, go read, I don't know, whatever. Go read something that you know you're not going to agree with, just for the sake of saying that you did it, and you know what the counter arguments to your arguments are, so that you can do a better job at steelmanning your arguments against their arguments. You see what I'm saying? Like, just kind of get out there. Just get out of your bubble. That's all I'm saying. Don't necessarily have to read this book, although this was a fine book to read. It's certainly less offensive than other books I could suggest for you to read that would probably make you want to throw it into a fireplace or take it to a firing range. But anyway, yeah. Read this book. Don't read this book. It's entirely up to you. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So if you did make it this far, as always, thank you. And if you did like it, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. Take care, and until next time.